Well, 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 a new racist hoax is sweeping America, and if you thought Jussie Smollett would be the end of it, frankly, I don't know how anyone gets away with this kind of crap after Jussie Smollett, but here we are, I guess. A Democrat state representative from the very racist state of Georgia is claiming that in the very racist establishment known as Public Supermarket, where shopping is supposedly a pleasure, she was berated by an evil white supremacist customer who told her to go back where she came from. The customer in this case obviously was parroting the words of Mr. Donald Trump, who of course has been telling Ilhan Omar to go back where she came from, which is of course just a nice way of Trump saying that he hates black people. We all know that. So this man in Publix, who of course was obviously a Trump supporter, and obviously hates the blacks, told her to go back where she came from. And so this poor woman, 9 months pregnant, with her daughter in her arms, decided to take to Twitter and post her crying reaction, saying that she just doesn't know how long she can go on living in a country this terrible. Now, of course, none of that really happened, at least not the way she said it. Apparently there was some kind of an discussion or a altercation, though it wasn't a physical altercation, a verbal altercation, you could say, between her and another customer who was a man that happened to have white skin. However, her fundamental claim that he, parroting the words of Donald Trump, told her to go back where she came from, apparently is not true, according to both the white man and now her. Now, of course, I can't have any sympathy for folks who believe this story to begin with, because Miss Thomas was telling a tale that simply didn't make sense. She supposedly encountered a white racist man who, of all things that a white racist man could have said to a black woman, told her to go back where she came from. He said this to a woman who sounds very American and clearly isn't an immigrant. Even amongst the most racist of white people, I've never heard this sort of an idea touted, that somehow blacks need to go back where they came from. There's no illusions amongst any white person that I've ever met or encountered, even on the darkest reaches of the internet where there are lots of racist people. I've never heard anyone say that somehow the blacks are at fault for being in America, and that they're somehow akin to invaders in a white country. Even the most racist of people recognize that the blacks were brought here as slaves, at least a large percentage of them. Obviously, there's been untold, tens of thousands of black people who have willingly immigrated to the United States over the history of the country. But if you're going to make some kind of a racist comment to a black person, go back where you came from just doesn't make any sense. I could understand someone saying that to, somebody who looks kind of Mexican and has and sounds like they have a bit of a Spanish accent. That I could understand. But it doesn't make sense to say to a black person who has no foreign accent at all and, looks and sounds like a normal American. And so that by itself made me think that her story was probably false. Before I heard any other facts, just the idea that could have occurred did not make much sense to me. And even if it did occur, then the guy clearly has a screw loose. He's not exactly someone who came to his racist positions, through reason and just happens to not like black people. He's someone who is not very bright, if that were true, which, of course, we know now that this is not true. So what really happened, you may ask, between Miss Thomas and this man we now know named Eric Sparks, I believe? Well, apparently, Miss Erica Thomas was in the express lane, the express checkout lane at Publix, which, of course, mandates that you must have only 10 items or less in your cart, and apparently Mr. Sparks noticed that she clearly had more than 20 items in her cart, more than twice the limit, and so he went up to customer service at the front of the store and said, "Hey, is there anything we can do about this? This woman is clogging up the express lane." And they said, "Well, it's our company policy that we can't actually say anything to someone because we don't, it'd be more trouble than it's worth for us to try and start an argument over a customer who put too many items in their cart. We just sort of smile and check them out. But you as a customer, why don't you go ahead and say something to her, and maybe she'll get out of line. And so this fella goes up and he says, hey lady, you've got too many items in your cart. Can you go to one of the non-express lanes, which there's an open one right over here. Apparently he said there were 2 open lanes that were non-express lanes that she could have used. And apparently her response was, well, I'm 9 months pregnant, so you shouldn't say anything to me. And of course that's a non sequitur. Being 9 months pregnant has nothing to do with the item limit for the express lane at Publix. And I guess they got into a bit of an argument, and, he called her a mean name, but which wasn't a racist name. It was, I don't want to get deranked by the YouTube algorithm, but it was, BITCH. And then apparently the man stormed out of the store. Now, this woman took this interaction with the man and seemed to project motives onto him which did not really exist. She said, well, a white man told me to get out of the express lane. That must mean that he's a racist and he wants me to go back to my country. And she's now backtracked, saying that, perhaps he didn't use the exact words, go back where you came from, but he was telling her to go. Yeah, he was telling you to go to the non-express lane. That's very different from telling you to get out of the country. And you may be asking yourself, well, why now is she letting the facade come down? What was it that really shattered her narrative that led her to capitulate in such a way and say, essentially, yeah, I made it all up? Well, it turns out the guy who she's accusing of being this evil white racist nativist who wants to send black people back to Africa, apparently he is not only the son of immigrants, but he's also a Democrat. So the whole idea that he's parroting Trump's line and is just such a big Trump supporter and he's trying to help Trump by getting the whites out of America, that narrative just doesn't make sense because he's not a Trump supporter. And so voila, we end up with Jussie Smollett 2.0, another race hoax debunked, this time in a matter of hours. I'm glad we're getting pretty good at this stuff. I hope we can keep debunking these because whenever somebody makes up something like this, all it does is just increase animosity between whites and blacks, which really is something that doesn't really need to happen. There's no actual, material struggle between whites and blacks in America. There's absolutely no fundamental reason why they can't coexist. It's not like any group, or either the groups are somehow a threat to one another. And of course, whites aren't a cohesive group, and frankly, neither are the blacks. You've got, patches of people who happen to be of certain skin colors scattered across the United States. It's not like you have, a one corner of America that's occupied by the blacks and another corner that's occupied by the whites, and both of those groups are homogenous. Far from it. So hopefully this story will not make it to the Monday news cycle and it'll get flushed down the drain and nobody will ever remember who Erica Thomas was, or at least they won't remember this incident, unless she tries to go for higher office or something, in which case she probably should be voted down because she's really dishonest. Like, this was a bad lie. So if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and subscribing. And if you do subscribe, please do click the bell because I do upload every day and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.